All right, Dan, it's Super Bowl week, so naturally we're going to talk about Major League Baseball contract extensions. um, it's always a exciting time for us, pitchers and catchers reporting about, I don't know, geez, less than a week, actually exactly a week here for most of these teams. So it's kind of a funny situation business wise, right? We're in some arbitration filings right now. Some of these teams are going back and forth with some big names. We're seeing some smaller extensions hit. I think there's maybe a few more baked into the cake here before opening day, maybe even right at opening day. I've got a list of 10 players here. I know you've briefed this list. Just give me out of the 10, how many of these players even broach a contract extension in your opinion this year? Not necessarily in the next couple of weeks, but this year. So before the offseason.
Oh, okay, including this
Yeah.
year. Okay,
Yeah,
I
let's give
was,
it, could be
I,
a trade deadline move or something like that, right?
yeah. I mean, what do you want to call it? Half, maybe half of these guys probably are like. Let me rephrase. All of
Mm-hmm.
these guys are realistic candidates for this. We tend to think from like a league health standpoint and a players association standpoint. All of these guys are not going to. These are the guys on this list are pretty much in the elite
Right.
or fringe elite group of talent in the major league. So for all of these guys to simultaneously punt on free agency or kick it down the line a little bit further, I'd be pretty surprised. But I think about half of them you could see some realistic players get locked up or teams lock these guys up. I mean,
That was where I was alluding to here. Is I think we've had back to back really healthy, really strong free agencies, especially for these elite players. I think they've done well, maybe even better than was to be assumed in some cases. The plethora of shortstops over the past two off seasons didn't stop teams from paying, even overpaying any of them. All of them made at least what they're worth, if not more, based on what the math says. So I think if you're a player like Juan Soto or Aaron Nola, who is on an expiring contract here, you've got to feel pretty good about whatever they're going to offer you today or whatever you can get next December 1st when there's 15 teams looking at you for the next 6 to 8 years. So I don't know if I would have felt this way 3 years ago. I thought there was a real downward trend with free agency. And I guess the answer was it just needed a shot in the arm. It needed 6 or 7 actual players to get there that were worth a damn, to get owners and front offices, and maybe there's some new ownership involved here too, obviously. But to get the ball rolling again, it feels like we're rolling free agency wise, right?
yeah, I'd say so. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's taking into consideration some of these massive quote value contracts from a team perspective that have already come off the board in recent years. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I agree. Free agency is kind of at its peak right now from what we've seen, and it's maybe a little bit dampened by some of the pre-arb extensions we've seen in recent years too.
Hmm.
So,
What's the worst contract sitting out there right now?
whew.
You don't have the sort of nerdy knowledge of it that I do. Just I'm wondering from the outsider's viewpoint a little bit here. What do you think is the lowest hanging fruit right now? I mean, the Hayward
um,
contract is off the books now. The Pujols contract is off the books now, and that's certainly rounded back into form.
yeah, and the Hosmer deal is sort of petering out now.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Is
I
it
mean, off the top of my
Strasburg?
head, but it's gonna be Strasburg. I mean, Baez, Javier Baez might be one of like the more poorly.
I mean,
Um,
The Corbin one's not long enough to qualify, but it's a mess. The Rendon one has got to be in this
yeah,
conversation.
I'm a Rendon apologist. I still think he's much better than he's performed since that contract was signed. Now, do I think he was likely overpaid for sure? But um, I still think there's meat on the bone. I think there's room for him to provide value in the next 2 to 3 years that might kind of recoup what people think about that contract. But I could be dead wrong on that as well. It may go down as one of the worst
Mm-hmm.
free agent contracts ever signed. But I'm a little bit more hopeful on that one. But yeah, the other Strasburg is that one was so puzzling, like why they even did it when they did it. The more I look into it, and we've
Yeah.
like been doing a lot of pre-arb data for the website, but I just can't figure out really the timing of it, the injury. I mean, he did stay healthy, but there were injury concerns coming into the league. There were just a number of questions why they locked him into that deal. And he really, I don't even think he's pitched on that deal one inning, has he?
It's minimal. It's maybe 15 to 20.
Yeah.
And I don't know that he ever pitches again. That they let the World Series pay him. It's what they did. It was the
Right.
Joe Flacco syndrome. And it happens. That at least there's that, right? At least they had won with him at some point and then decided he was going to be the cornerstone piece going forward. What about the Mickey Cabrera situation? I'm trying to load ourselves into a conversation of what type of contracts and extensions maybe should baseball really be getting rid of? Is the second Mickey Cabrera contract fine in your opinion? Or is that one of those situations where I don't care how attached this player is to the franchise, you just can't do that anymore, you know? It was like 3 years early.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. It feels, I mean, some of these contracts we see right now are going to turn into that contract.
Yeah.
In the future, it's just that.
Yes and no, Dan. Yes and no. At least with some of these newer deals, especially the free agency ones, they were segmented from their previous contract or even their previous team. The Cabrera one is we're just going to continue to roll this over. It's almost like the Patriots paying Tom Brady 3 massive contracts while in the middle of the previous contract. You know what I mean? Like instead of letting it get to the end of the contract and then deciding, yeah, well, let's do this again. Let's run it back. They just kept rolling it over, almost as if they felt they had to do it early enough because the average annual value stuff was just skyrocketing in the league. And if they did it early enough, maybe they'd get some value out of it. It makes no sense. The Ryan Braun contract with Milwaukee was similar. It made absolutely no sense when they did it, and obviously steroids and whatnot took that down the tank. But that to me feels like the absolute no in this sport anymore. And by the way, I think the players should be saying the same thing too with this free agency burst we're having. I think, some of these guys should not even consider an extension with a couple of years left on their current contract. We're going to talk about Machado at the end of this conversation, but I just wonder where we're going with this,
Yeah, so I think it is important to separate these out
Yeah.
into guys who are extending multiple years out when they are free agent eligible versus these guys who are extending early when they're pre-arb or arb eligible. I think it is important to kind of
Totally.
outline that. The Miguel Cabrera contract was an extension when he was already free agent eligible. Like you said, they kind of signed that a little bit early. So that doesn't really makes sense to me because the free agent number is going to be high either way. Like, are you going to save a little bit by signing him early, like we see with teams trying to do with quarterbacks in the NFL? Yeah, probably, but you're still paying him a huge chunk of money to eat into years that really the team is taking on all the leverage from that perspective. But these other guys like Ketel Marte, who signed a pre-arb extension with options and then signed an arbitration extension that voided those options and then got him into free agency years. I don't have an issue with those kind of contracts. It's the ones in free agent. Sorry, we should just back up also and put a disclaimer on this. This is from the team perspective in terms of trying to manage a team payroll. We are very pro labor. We are very much for players maximizing their financial value throughout their career. I just want to put that out there because I keep seeing a lot of stuff. And sometimes I do think we lean into the value thing a little bit too much, but SpotTrack.com is all about financials and values, and we have to look at it from that perspective. So from Miggy Cabrera locking in all that generational money, I don't have any issue from it. From a team perspective, though, I think it's less than ideal to be extending players who are on a free agent contract and extending them with another essentially free agent extension, if you will.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, there's nothing value about the 10 guys we're talking about today. I mean, I've literally handpicked pretty much the top of the market here in terms of guys I think are next up. You gave me a couple of of the pre-arb players that I think could be in this conversation, and I like him quite a bit. But let's start at the top where it belongs, which is I think the running theme of this entire season, Shohei Ohtani, right? How could it not be?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at this point, I think we all feel there's zero chance he gets to. I mean, not to step on your article. Mike's prediction here is that he hits the open market. I don't think we have really any indication that at this point anything different would happen. If we think if he had intentions of locking an extension with the Angels, or open to locking in an extension with a team that trades for him, we think it probably would have went down that route already. So it does seem like all signs point to him testing the market in one way or another, whatever that means.
Are you? Let's just foreshadow, because I don't think there's any chance an extension happens either. Are you okay with the Angels just holding on to this for dear life to the bitter end and not getting any trade value for him? I mean, we saw it with Bryce Harper, and they won the World Series the next year.
Right. Different situation, though. Team very much primed to win. Didn't want to pull the rug out from under themselves. I mean, some people might argue the Angels are primed to win, but I'm not one of them this year. I know I have been in the past. I think you have to look yourself in the mirror long and hard at the deadline, and you have to get some value for him. And typically we see players, heading into free agency, or, on the verge of free agency, their trade value be super minimal. We've seen that really kind of be solidified in recent years, specifically really since the Manny Machado trade a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I still think teams that are jockeying to get the edge on either trying to extend him will be willing to overpay a little bit. There's certain organizations that have the depth to overpay with the hopes of extending him, even if Scott Boras has no intention of doing that, to at least get him in-house for a playoff run and hopefully be able to woo him into a long-term extension. Now, whether that actually happens or not, I'm a little skeptical. I think you're skeptical. But I do think a team like the Dodgers would be able to one up other teams in terms of prospect value in order to try and do that and have the chance at it.
Why wait then? Has to be the logical next question, because
the Angels, from the Angels' perspective,
because here's the point to be made, and it's a flimsy point, but it's a point. They're projected to be fourth in this division out of the gate. Texas, Seattle, Houston, all projected to have more wins than them this year, according to a couple of the sites I've looked at. They're about an 81 win team, according to Vegas right now, with Ohtani on the roster. Why even wait? Isn't there significantly more value today than there will be July 31st? If it's the right team. If it's the Dodgers. Let's say it's the Dodgers.
Well, the Dodgers should theoretically have no issue getting into the playoffs, though, with or without Ohtani. So I think from a bona fide contender's perspective, they can kind of wait and see what happens. I don't know, and I don't want to try and act like I know what the Angels are up to, but with the ownership sale, with having a cornerstone player like Ohtani, is it better? We've talked about this. Is it better to have him in-house for a sale? Is it better to not?
Well, Moreno's not selling now, Dan.
Exactly. That conversation got thrown out the window with Moreno, but now we have to kind of reshift what we think he is trying to do. If he wants to keep it, does he want to try and extend him? Does he say get it done at all costs? I mean, I still don't think Ohtani or Scott Boras, whoever is the leader there, is going to want to go back to the Angels, considering what is going on here. But I mean, it's very possible Perry Minasian is a sitting duck, lame duck GM here too within the next couple of years. So is he going to be the guy who offers him a $500 million contract? Is Artie Moreno going to let that happen? Man, I have no clue what the Angels are doing. I still just don't think unless he really loved his time in LA with that not even just LA, with that organization specifically,
Right.
I don't really see why he would have any motivation to sign a long-term contract there. So,
Give me 3 teams who would trade for him right now.
well, the Dodgers, obviously,
Obviously.
and I kind of point directly to that because of I think they could outdo any team in terms of prospect capital. I think the Mets would obviously be in, but I mean, there's some appealing packages there around Francisco Alvarez, Brent Beatty, something like that, but I don't really know if they have the pitching prospects to get it done, quite honestly. I mean, then who else are we talking about here? I know Seattle is on your short list. I think they're a little bit gutted. The Padres are on, are a talking point. I think their system is a little bit gutted in terms of a trade. So a lot of these teams, I feel like they have to wait in terms of what they currently have to work with. As I talk through it, I really wonder how many teams can outbid the Dodgers if the Dodgers want to be the team to get first access. But do they even want to? Do they just want to get to the open market with him? It's really hard to quantify all of these moving pieces, right?
Outside of the Dodgers, who have one of the best rosters in baseball and the best farm system in baseball, which is freaking absurd, but that's where we are. And by the way, they kind of took the offseason off here. They kind of slow played this offseason, let a couple of pieces move on, drop themselves down in the tax conversation a little bit, which is good business on their part, because I think you're right. I think they know they can kind of back their way into the playoffs this year, really without doing too much, without doing too much more tinkering. They'll do something at the deadline. I'm sure they always do. But my guess is they're sitting here looking around just like we just did and aren't too concerned about somebody jumping right now with an overpay trade price, right? I think everybody in the league just has a wink and nod, situation in the back of their minds that this is going to free agency and we'll win the war there.
Here, I'll give you 2 teams. I think
I've got 2 more as well. Go ahead.
Yeah. So 2 teams, I think theoretically there could be a need there. Plus, they'd have the prospect capital to get it done, and would probably be willing. If they're doing this, we're hypothetically saying they're willing to extend him and/or will have interest in him on the open market if he hits in 2024. The Cardinals have.
Okay, that's my number 1 team.
Yeah, so the Cardinals have a ton of prospect depth,
Yeah.
Probably to the point where they don't really know what to do with it. We've talked about this. I think they're a player for Corbin Burns or Brandon Woodruff if those guys are available. They need an ace. They have a good enough lineup to get to the playoffs to win that division. They need an ace at least if they want to really be a bona fide contender, in my opinion.
And quite frankly, Arenado not opting out and staying on that contract was a huge win for them financially. Huge.
For sure. And they do have some arms. Maybe they're just going to wait those guys out. But I mean, if Wainwright retires after this year and you're suddenly looking around at like a Jack Flaherty, Steven Matz, I mean, they're going to add there somewhere.
But Nolan Gorman, there's a lot of nice players they could toss into this conversation. Yep.
Tons of them. So that's number 1. My really dark horse team. I know you're the Cubs. The Cubs are ready. They're walking the walk. They're talking the talk. They're acting like they're ready to contend. They have a sneaky good farm system. They really did a phenomenal job of retooling. I know they didn't get anything for Wilson Contreras, but the Chris Bryant trade, the Anthony Rizzo trade, and the Javi Baez trade, they got a nice crop of young guys back. They've hit on some draft picks lately. They've made some decent international signings that have worked out here. I think they're like, if you say pick a dark horse team that's really not being talked about a lot in terms that has a chance at Ohtani, it's a major market. They're going to be looking for a cornerstone player to build around. I could totally see the Cubs being that team. The late inning, a sneaky team, an unknown team has entered the market. I could see that being the Cubs. So I think if we're talking about teams that are going to try and outdo who can extend him and might want to get first dibs by trading for him before the trade deadline this year, though, the Dodgers, the Cardinals, the Cubs are my 3 favorites.
I'm not going to sleep on Texas. Texas has no reason to stop right now, and they still have a top 10 farm system according to the rankings.
They do, and a lot of those farm system pieces kind of build how they have constructed their team thus far. So I'm a little bit hesitant to think that they're gonna, based on how they spent the last 2 years on Simeon, Seager, and now DeGrom. I'm a little bit worried to thinking that they're going to commit another 500 million to a player. But you're totally right. New stadium, there's massive development around there. That ownership group is all in. Could it be Ohtani is the next one? It certainly could be, Mike.
Why not?
That's a good call.
And then the only other thing I'll say, and we'll get on to our next candidate here. If and when it gets to free agency, and I believe it does, I think the Angels are flawed. And flawed to the point of where they're going to stay with this guy as long as they can because he's relevant, and they won't be. So that's their only kind of way to finish the season, is to have this guy in the roster still, because everybody's going to be talking about him. Even though the talking about him is going to be about him not being with them next year, they're still talking about him in reference to the Angels. So I actually think that's how this works out. And that's a terrible statement, but I think it's the actual way that this plays out. So let's say it gets to free agency. There is one more team that has got to be in. They have to be in. And I think they're going to be as aggressive as any of these teams we've mentioned, including the Dodgers, and it's the Boston Red Sox. If it gets to the floor and we're sitting here on December 1st, a legitimate run for Shohei Ohtani at least establishes some credibility for that franchise again. The Devers contract starts that process. But if you're the runner-up, at least, let's say they don't win out. I'm not sure they will. They have got to be a top 3 team making offers for Shohei Ohtani. They just have to be. It is the one single thing that can take them from a C to a B in this league again, and they absolutely must do that. And baseball needs them to do that. I love your Cubs take. I love it. It would take 6 months of what you've been talking about with this franchise. It would make it all worth it. You know what I mean? It would become, all right, now we're here. We've arrived. Let's get ourselves back to where we used to be. I've got it. My prediction, I'm just going to bury the league because nobody's going to read these freaking articles anyway, right?
We just spent 45 minutes on one player. So
my prediction is 10 years, 450 to the Dodgers. I don't think it gets to 500. I think there's some creativity built into it. Maybe there's tons of escalators like the Julio Rodriguez contract that allows it to get to 500 pretty easily. But on its face, I just can't see a team. I mean, even 45 million a year for one player, that's an insane, I know we've got 43 and change right now in Scherzer and Verlander. It's just a lot of damn tax salary for one player. So I don't think we can get to 50 million a year next year. It's coming eventually. I just don't think we're there quite yet. But that's where I sit. I still think the Dodgers win this thing out at the end of it. And I think you're right there with me.
Yeah, if I'm going to oppose you at all on this, I think it does somehow, some way get over 500 million, but you're the numbers guy. You have the numbers behind it. I'm just going
just a
on
big
gut.
jump.
I know. I think here's my advocacy for why I think that a lot of times we see this real ceiling get lowered on these contracts when there's concerns about where that player will play. We have talked through how his career will, how he will age, where he'll move, how he'll play. He's still a good defender. He has an incredible arm. You can move him around first base. You can maybe have him as a reliever. The Ohtani rule is there. So I do think that there's less concern about if he doesn't pitch beyond 3 or 4 years from now, if that's a 10-year deal. I do think teams will be able to, kind of bite, swallow hard and just rip off that contract, even if it is in an uncomfortable range. But you have the numbers behind it. 10 for 450 seems right on the nose. I'm just like, as a gut feel, I feel like it somehow gets over 500, but I don't have anything concrete to back that up.
Plenty more time to talk about this. No question.
Yeah, only
10 more months at least minimum. Let's stay out west with Juan Soto. Just off the gate, we've talked a bit about him. He didn't have the greatest 2022. In fact, his value dipped quite a bit in our system, down below Vlad Guerrero, believe it or not. Is there any chance that Soto and Boris do this one early?
I say no. I mean, I think all of these guys we just saw what happened with bidding wars with less than elite. Like, sorry, I don't want to. I'm not dogging those players. They're still elite. These guys are like really what we would classify as generational talents.
Cornerstones, totally.
Yeah, and if all three of those guys hit the open market in the same year, I mean, we're not just gonna see teams say, oh, we only had this much in our budget. Like if there's a war, if there is a bidding war for these three players, the numbers are going to get real high.
Yeah, there's 4 or 5 guys in this list that all kind of gloss together, contractually speaking and value speaking, and it's really just going to be a cat and mouse game, like it was with the shortstops, right? Who's going to strike first, and then who's going to go above that, and then who's going to go above that, and who's going to go above that, right? And I think Soto is just going to want to be last. That's the way I read this. He was going to want to be after Alonso and after Vlad Jr. and maybe after Ohtani next year. And I just think he's going to sit this whole season out, reestablish his elite value on a loaded lineup, and then start talking about this in December again. But I don't think there's a chance we're even talking about a contract there. And oh, by the way, he's going to wait to see what happens with Machado.
Right, I know. I incorrectly lumped him in with the other two guys in free agency next year. He does have an extra year of arbitration.
One more, yeah.
Yeah, so I misspoke on that one, but yeah, I mean theoretically, what we might refer to as 3 generational players hitting free agency and back, a combined 3 guys in 2 years. Numbers are gonna pop. That's for sure.
Yeah, so he and Pete Alonso are aligned at the hip here, and that's going to be fascinating if both are slow played or both choose to slow play this process, which I think could happen. I still think there's an Ohtani-like contract for Juan Soto. Dan, he's only 24.
It's crazy.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And he's already done so much, including the World Series win with Washington after taking over full-time for Bryce Harper. He just feels like an old man already in this system, and he's not. He is more than worthy of maybe the longest, biggest contract in history, not named Shohei Ohtani. So I think that's what he's second in my article. I think that's how this is all going to play out. It's just going to take some time. He's not going to jump into anything here. What about Vlad Jr.? We've seen that the Blue Jays be a little bit more aggressive than normal, which is a good thing. We both think they have to do that to really push up that AL East. They've moved a couple players off the roster, which I think are addition by subtraction in a lot of cases. They're going to start to lock up this young core. They've bought out Bo Bichette's arbitration process. Vlad's got to be on the books here at some point in time, right? I mean, there's time. There's plenty of arbitration in front of him. But where do we go with this? Is he just sitting this out for a bit? To kind of see where all the chips fall. He's got 2 more arbitration years, but ARB 2 was $14.5 million. I mean, that's not normal. That's not normal. His numbers are absurd. I know you're all in on this guy. If you're his agent right now, let's take it from the player's perspective. What are you doing? What are you thinking?
Honestly, I think from the tea leaves I'm reading, it sounds like he is open to an early extension. But it seems like he's the kind of guy that wants just fair market value, like a Devers type contract, where he's not looking to get overpaid to take an early deal. He's the cornerstone of that franchise. He grew up in Canada. That's sort of an underrated point that people don't really think about. I just think he's going to be open in one of the biggest markets in the league with a team that is very well ran from the top down. They're going to be contenders in years that they aren't going to be contenders. They're going to be actively retooling to get back into contention quickly. I think he would definitely be open as he's seeing other guys around him get locked in. They have a really good pitching staff for the next couple years. I mean, maybe Vlad Guerrero just says, let me just play out my string here and try and win a World Series and I'll hit the open market. That's totally within his range. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's just like a personal bias I have. I'm willing to admit that, but I think this gets done. But it follows kind of the trajectory of a Devers deal where we're not looking at it going, wow, they saved a ton of money by doing it early, or wow, the player seems like he's going to lose out on a ton of money over the course of this deal. I think it's going to be good for both sides, and it's just going to be something that both sides want to meet at the table and get it done before anything deteriorates and they get closer to free agency.
If you're 23 years old and you've hit 80 home runs with 208 RBIs in the past 2 seasons, are you thinking one contract for the rest of my career right now? Or do you think that a player like this should segment this? and get himself to age 30 and then do it all over again?
Yeah, good question. I mean, he's a first baseman that can't at this point play elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, they tried
So
third for a minute. It didn't work.
yeah, he was fine, but not real great. It was just a natural transition. I my gut reaction was going to say leave room for outs in it, but I could see him just locking it in. And but maybe the team would be motivated to leave outs on their end in case it doesn't age well. But I mean, we just again, to compare it to Devers, we just saw this with Devers where they're paying him as if he's going to stay at third. Where a lot of people, I know I've made the point he's made strides at third base defensively, but people around the industry don't think he's going to stick there more than 2 or 3 years. So now you're moving a guy making 30 plus mil over to first base. It's sort of the Vlad Guerrero situation, except he just doesn't play third. So, and sorry to back up, we saw the Devers deal have no outs included in it, right? So,
yep.
I think it'll follow something similar to that. I think from a player perspective, he might just want to lock in that one contract, but it really is hard to tell when these guys can get back into the open market a couple years down the line and basically double what they would have made. It's appealing.
He's a 12-year, $425 million player in our system right now, Dan.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a no-joke situation. Not enough people have seen this guy because of the lack of postseason prowess with Toronto. That's coming. That's all going to be part of this.
Sorry, can we just establish when you say him getting into free agency again?
Yeah.
You think this is a 10-year deal or a 15-year deal? Because he is young. I mean,
right.
An 8 to 10-year deal still gets him back on the open market in his prime, right?
I'm wondering if he's not pushing for an 8-year deal. Is my point. Yeah.
And I was laying that out as if it's a 10-year deal with an out after 5. So I'm glad we clarified that. Yeah, I agree with that.
I think Toronto's pushing for the 12-year deal, just because of the tax situation and all the other mouths they have to feed in that roster right now to keep things going. They probably shouldn't be, and quite honest, quite frankly, I think everybody should be happy with the 6 to 8 deal and overpay it for a bunch of years. Because especially in that division, it's only a matter of time before, the pecking order changes again and Toronto's just not in contention. It's just how it works, So I think that realistically they could get themselves to, an 8-year deal at a really good premium or a 10 for 350 or something like that and make it all work. But this guy's getting generational money. There's no question about that. And if it's not right now, as you allude to, it might be. It's probably coming after the season, which might even be better for him because I think both you and I believe Toronto is going to be a team with a force this year, a real chance to overtake the Yankees in a lot of cases and actually make a huge name for themselves. So he might elevate this thing all over again this time next season. We'll see. Let's go to Pete Alonso with the Mets. The Mets paid everybody else in the world except for Pete Alonso. Some people don't understand that. My guess is it's just Pete saying not yet. Is that fair? My guess is an offer's been made. Why wouldn't it have been?
Yeah. I mean, could there be any luxury tax implications that they don't want to break off another big contract into this season? I don't know. Yeah, I similar situation. I think he likes it there. The team wants to have him there long term. I don't see why this one won't get done similarly along the lines of Vlad.
Does he have to be paid more than Lindor?
I've actually been hearing this. I actually heard this discussed a couple weeks ago on a podcast in terms of like locker room dynamics and who, the highest paid guy is the leader. I think you can match it or come very close. I mean, Pete doesn't come off to me like that ego dude who wants to be the highest paid in the room. He's going to have a voice either way. He's going to be a leader on that team either way. For the sake of just saying we need to one up Lindor's contract for a first baseman, I don't think that's like the bar. Now, if just in the inflation of contracts year to year,
you value the shortstop more, is what you're saying?
Yeah, premium position for sure. I don't think you have to compare the two one for one and say Pete needs to be paid more than Lindor. And Do you think he's worth? Do you think he should be paid 35 mil? To get him over.
If I'm kind of reading the tea leaves here, Dan, the 14.5 that he just agreed to avoid arbitration in his second year of arbitration, based on the formulas that we use, that makes him a $36 million player.
Right.
That's basically what the Mets just said with this offer, with this arbitration offer.
2 years from now as well.
Yeah. That's what the long-term market value of Pete Alonso is in the Mets' eyes, is basically what this means. So, yeah. Does he compromise at 35, go slightly north of Lindor's 34.1? Yeah, I think that's probably where we're headed here. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I really don't. Lindor is boy, how do I say this without sounding like a jerk? Lindor sounds like it's more the teacher's pet. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
He's constantly in with Buck Showalter. He's probably the captain of this team right now, to be honest. But he can't really be that because Max Scherzer is just literally a force, like a screaming, loud force. He's that guy right now, and Verlander is going to be the 1A of that. So there's a lot of other bodies on this dugout right now. So to have that argument about who needs to be the voice or the statue, the example in that locker room, there's like a half dozen players at this point of time that are going to hold that banner. I just think Alonso is at least on par in this conversation. And if you're telling me there's a new CBA and the tax salary went up and there's a new owner who's throwing offers to Correa with a bad foot, right? I mean, there's a lot of things built into this. You're just going to have to go next man up for Alonso. You're just going to have to. You don't have to crush it. You don't have to give the guy Aaron Judge's contract, but you're probably going to have to, surpass the Lindor contract slightly and just move forward.
I think things naturally go there. I guess I was just trying to lay out that I don't think it's like an internal negotiation among Pete's people or the team saying we got to get him over Lindor's number because we want him to be the leader. I think it just might naturally get there over the next 2 years based on his ARB numbers and what our numbers suggest that's going to top out at, and when he gets to free agency. So yeah, I'm on board with that.
Do you think they have to wait? They have to wait until the Scherzer Verlander stuff falls off?
So I guess I haven't looked at their luxury tax situation a few years down the line here, but I do wonder if that's not a thing. I mean, they're going for it now. They obviously want to keep Pete in the fold. That's going to be a major hole in your lineup if you have to try and replace him in a couple years. But yeah, I think they're trying to lay it all out. They really do. We act like Steve Cohen just throws caution to the wind, which he sort of has, but I think we underestimate the fiscal plan that they have in place. They have it mapped out. They know what they want to do. They know how they want to layer and structure these deals. I mean, like you have a Marte contract to deal with. You just signed Brandon Nimmo. You have a huge Diaz contract to deal with. I mean, among the other people you've already mentioned, I'm leaving out Verlander, all these guys. So yeah, I think they need to be strategic and not just say, you're ready to get paid, let's pay you, So I think they have time to wait, and they sort of should wait in this situation.
Let's go to a couple of names here, and we won't go through all 10. We'll make sure, I'll post out some notes and things like that with this article on Twitter, at SpyTruck on Twitter. Let's go to 2 names I think are going to get done in the next couple of weeks. We've already heard rumblings about Logan Webb, the starting pitcher for the Giants. I think you agree, right, that this seems like it's going to be a slam dunk. Just get it done. He's the clear ace now there.
Yep. Yeah, I think it will trend that way. I know I just said we shouldn't talk value. I think from a team perspective, it will look good for them. I think from a player perspective, it will look good for him. He's going to get paid what he earns or what he deserves. And I don't think the team will have regrets about forfeiting some of his trying to go to arbitration with him or anything like that. So yeah, I think this is trending that way. The Giants look like they want to spend. They've let pitching get out of town in recent years. So I think in a relatively homegrown pitcher like Logan Webb, I think is a guy they'd be motivated to keep around in the fold for a couple years.
He's an ARB1. He just avoided at $4.6 million.
Right.
You've done a bunch of work on these ARB extensions of late. Where do you think this ends up, Dan?
I think it climbs relatively quick based on his early career production. I mean, the platform year comes into play so much here, which is why we see like a substantial raise in his first year of arbitration. That first year is key in terms of like compounding salary in future years. Like at the comparison I'm making is Cody Bellinger. We saw early career production from Cody Bellinger. It got him to historic levels in arbitration. Then we saw that production fall off in recent years. And last year he still got paid what was it, 18 mil in arbitration, which was
It's just flatlined essentially.
Exactly. So not that I'm not predicting Logan Webb is going to fall off. I'm just predicting that his early season production and consistency is going to be a good sign for his ARB years. I think the 4.5 number is right there, and I think your extension prediction is right in line with what he would get in terms of arbitration. So
yeah, the NL Cy Young winner Sandy Alcantara just actually it was almost a full year ago now, locked in a 5 for 56 arbitration extension at the exact same point of his team control that Logan Webb sits in right now. There's an option to get it up into the 70s or close to the 70s in over a 6-year span. You want to talk about value. This is a value contract. I mean, he's only getting $20 million across his arbitration total for 3 seasons. And then things jump up a little bit in his first 2 free agency seasons. I don't believe that's where Logan Webb has to be. I think Logan Webb has to get into the $27 to $30 million range for arbitration based on where he started now at $4.5 million. So I've got this at about 5 for 60, maybe with options and escalators to get this even higher, just because of where Alcantara's contract came in. If you talk about Spencer Strider, Dan, who the Braves just locked in, he had 2 pre-arb seasons left. He's getting 75 over the next 7 seasons. With the club option built in, there's a lot to think about here, right? I mean, we're sort of seeing just a rogue, whatever is the situation. Nobody's really bouncing off other contracts like other sports tend to do. The Giants don't have a lot of mouths to feed. They've swung and missed in a lot of free agent situations here. I don't know. Do you just lock this guy in even longer term than some of these other pre-arb extensions you've seen?
Theoretically, sure, if they want to. I actually love the Sandy. I know offline we've had some back and forth on it. You've been sort of hammering it, deservedly so. But if we also put ourselves back into pre-2020 status, where Sandy Alcantara had not broken out yet, and he was more of just like a tantalizing prospect that with tons of potential. That's sort of where we are with Logan Webb. He was kind of a hot breakout candidate last year. He had a really good year, but he didn't really pop the way people thought he would. Sandy Alcantara was the guy that last year that was a sleeper candidate people thought would pop. He did pop in a big way. So what I'm trying to say here is if Miami waited for the Alcantara year to happen, the NL Cy Young year to happen, this contract would have been much more than we saw, right? So I'm arguing that the Giants should be motivated to get something in that range done, because if Logan Webb, let's say, is a top 5 NL Cy Young candidate this year, that contract is going up every time he steps on the mound, right? So I like that comparison in terms of Logan Webb is last year's version of, or this year's version of Sandy Alcantara last year almost. So
I've got the Houston Astros at about 197 in projected tax payroll. So, give or take 30 some million of space, 44 million of space, give or take some pre-arb stuff. Isn't it the right time to lock in Kyle Tucker, Dan? Who's going to be the next big thing?
I know in the past, yes. Let me just leave it at yes. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of money committed to a few guys right now, but those will come off the board in a couple years. They
literally 2 for Altuve and Bregman, 2 more years.
Exactly right, and then it's just Alvarez beyond that.
Jose Abreu, Lance McCullers, but it dwindles. Yep, Alvarez.
Right.
So they could use another bat for the next 5-6 years, no question about it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why we think that internally he could be one of these guys that they identify. They really haven't broken off one of these massive contracts, extensions for one of their players in a while. I think Kyle. I mean, we talked about this in the past. Kyle Tucker was slow played like few prospects I've ever seen in my life. I feel like this guy for 5 years, we kept hearing Kyle Tucker. This is the year he gets right field. This is the year he plays 500 plate appearances. It never happened until a couple years ago. Whether that is them really trying to polish him as a prospect, whether they were trying to keep, financial numbers down, or just like extend his window out a little bit. I don't really know, but here he is, 26, about, coming into the prime of his career. I think they're going to be motivated to try and lock something up here.
Yeah.
And why not, right?
No, it's the right time for a lot of, you mentioned most of the reasons I was going to bring up, which is the pendulum is swinging a little bit towards, getting off of that Altuve generation and into this next generation. And I think Kyle Tucker is that next generation. Alvarez is going to be the big bat, right? Your power bat, and you've locked him up accordingly. Framber Valdez is going to be the big pitcher for the next 4 to 5 years. He's ARB 3. You're going to have to do something about him sooner rather than later. So maybe they prioritize that over Tucker. I wouldn't. If Kyle Tucker has another 30 and 100 year, he's got 2 in a row, almost identical seasons. If he does a third in a row, there's just no looking back. It's almost to the point now where we're just going to wait this out, get the free agency like Springer and Correa did, right? You don't want it. You don't want that to happen again. You've lost big names on purpose, I think, in Houston, because you had fill-ins. Clearly, they had backups ready to step in, prospects ready to step in. I'm not sure that's the case with Kyle Tucker, who has been the prized prospect waiting in the wings, as you laid out there. So I do think it's the right time for them, and they have the space on their tax payroll right now. They can remain under the threshold, remain in contention. They've already got 95% of this roster laid out for 2023 as they approach spring training. It's the right time. That should be the next big contract to hit, in my opinion, over the next couple of weeks here.
Yeah, we have him at estimated at almost $6 million in his first year of arbitration, which we just laid out with Vlad Guerrero, is a very strong number. So
very strong number. If we put it into the little formula here, we're talking about, basically 30 a year. So you want to do essentially a modern day inflation adjusted version of Alex Bregman's deal. What do you want to do? You gave Bregman 5 for 100 forever ago, right? You want to push that now into what now the standards of that in 2023 would be, and just get it done and lock him in for your next 5-6 seasons. That's the way to go here. So I don't think it has to be a blockbuster contract, because that's not how the Houston Astros are going to operate, at least not during this current regime. But to me, he's the big one. It's not Alonso. It's not Vlad. It's not Juan Soto. Certainly not Ohtani. I think the Kyle Tucker is going to be the next big blockbuster extension in Major League Baseball leading up to April 1st here.
I actually love that. I will jump on that and predict this gets done before opening day. Actually, I like it as you've laid it out. I think all the signs are there for them to make a move on Kyle Tucker.
And they've been quiet, right? They're just kind of doing their business internally, which makes me think even more that's how they're operating internally. They've got decisions to be made internally here with him. They're working out his arbitration filing right now. Why not? Why not just throw it out the window and announce a 7-8 year extension instead? I think that's where we're headed.
And we see that sometimes with these teams that take guys to arbitration. We on the outside look at it as, whoa, they didn't get a deal done, where they just look at it as like an extension to a deadline to say, well, we just needed more time to work on a deal.
And you know why? And this is undersold. I've said it a couple times. I've had agents come on here and say it out loud to me too. It can get pretty ugly in arbitration. They can get pretty damn nasty. You are under a microscope. All of your bads are exposed, right? And your goods certainly come out as well. But it gets pretty contentious between team, player, and agent during those filings, during those settlement processes. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to rub things the wrong way and risk the chance that things could go sour for the next 2 years, 3 years of arbitration here with what should be your preeminent hitter.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We got to come back and do a Machado episode, because clearly we're not going to squeeze him into what's been an hour of talk already. But we got a lot more baseball to get to. There's no question about it. A lot more Ohtani to get to. I think a deep dive on Boston and Philadelphia specifically have to come in our lives here soon, because they're going 2 separate directions, and they've got some history tied to each other. and just where those things end up. You know, the Phillies could essentially be the Los Angeles Rams. You know, I'm kind of concerned that that's where we're going with the Philadelphia Phillies if a lot of good things don't happen. But ton of money spent on that roster. Not a lot of money spent on Boston. They're in transition right now. And what's happening with your Cubs? Because I do think, and I'm calling them your Cubs,
Cubs,
even though I sat with you and watched your Cubs beat your then Indians in the World Series. So
amazing.
Lots of baseball. We'll talk soon, man. Thanks.
I'm the Cubs stan all of a sudden.
That's the only way to end this conversation.
All right, thanks, Mike.